Hey, welcome back to part two, as we are joined here with Jeff and Shanti Feldhahn to talk more about their book, Secrets of Sex and Marriage. And we're going to jump right back into, as we're talking about. So I've been reading you guys this book, and, I'm going through it. I'm getting so much from this. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is eye-opening. This is so cool. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, Angel's my wife. I'm like, Angel, I need you to see this. I need you to read this. You need to read this book with me. And so it's just been really cool.
Thanks for saying that. That's
great.
really encouraging.
Well, we actually, in writing the book with Dr. Mike, the intention was that a couple would read it aloud to each other.
Yeah.
And
I can see why
Yeah.
as I'm getting into the book. Yeah. And so what do you hope readers actually gain from this book?
Well, candidly, one of the things, basically the main thing that we started out with was all of our research projects all of them are digging out the little things that matter. Like here are, like, if you only change this or you only knew that, what is it that if you apply it will make the biggest difference? Like this small change, but it has this big impact. And so that's really what we're hoping is for people who felt stuck in this area and people who felt like there's heartache, or it could just, their intimate life could just be more fun and more delightful and more intimate and more playful, for them to go, oh my goodness, like most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, this stuff isn't rocket science. Yeah. There's stuff we just didn't know.
And one of the things for me as we were going through all of this is hearing couples when they would say, like, well, I want this. I want it to be better, and you want this to be better. Yes. So why isn't it for us? And if sense. We both want this, and Dr. Mike always says, that's the right question. If it isn't happening as much and you both want it, then why?
Why
and
not?
so then the two of you can be sitting on the same side of the table and working through solutions.
Yeah. That's so good.
Yeah.
So share with us some of the other surprises that you guys got from this research that you put in the book here.
Some of those solutions, right? Some of the other things that matter. Well, one of the ones that no one thinks is a thing, but it's a thing for like many, many couples. I think it was 2/3 of couples, something like that. We actually, one of the reasons we're not connecting as much as we want is that we don't have a pattern for initiation that both people know is initiation. And when we say that, people are like, what? Because we're basically saying, you don't know how to initiate. What do you mean I don't know how to initiate? But if
how to signal.
And so just think about it like, have you or your spouse, whoever's listening to this, have you or your spouse ever thought, oh, maybe something might happen tonight, and then been disappointed? Mm-hmm. Or have you ever?
Absolutely.
I think that's going to be a lot of people, right? Or have you ever not recognized that your spouse realizing later that they wanted something to happen and you felt pressure because you felt you disappointed them? And pretty much everybody can say yes to one of those two questions, at least occasionally. And that often is a problem with a signal for initiation.
So one of the great stories we heard was of a couple, where she said to him the next day or whatever, they were in a counseling session.
I think they were actually at Dr. Mike's office. and he's like, she said, you never want sex.
And she said, well, last night I signaled to you.
No. She didn't say signal.
No,
she said, last night I put my hand on your knee while we were watching the news.
And the guy went, that was a signal?
That was you initiating? And so there is a need for every couple to know what is being communicated and asked for, or to know whether their spouse is open. Mm-hmm. And we heard this great example. We actually put this in one of the chapters because we thought it was so perfect, of a couple where they had realized that this was a thing. Like they had realized, oh my gosh, like we're just missing what people want or what they're open. And this
particular couple, he was more initiating and she was more receptive.
Yes, hearkening back to the last podcast. about, he was higher desire, he was more initiating desire, and she was the one who was a little bit less and more receptive. And so she is a pharmacist and works these long shifts, right? And so he was always like, I have no idea. Like, are you tired? Are you not tired? Like, how do I know? And so they bought a dry erase marker, and they, in their master bathroom, when she gets home from her shift, she will like write a little number from 1 to 10 in like an inconspicuous corner of the mirror. And he'll check it. And
when
if
he
it's
comes home from
when
work.
he comes home from work, and if it says 8 to 10, it's like, I'm a sure bet if you ask, right? It's her saying, how open do I feel? How receptive do I feel tonight? If it's 1 to 4, it's kind of stay back if you want to keep your parts, right? And if it's that 5 to 7, it's kind of a
convince me.
Like maybe,
Persuade me.
like
Yeah.
maybe I might be open. But
So
what
creative.
that does is it actually completely avoids that, oh, wow, maybe something might happen, but is it really going to, or is a tired, should I put myself out there and be vulnerable to initiate when I might get rejected? Like,
rejected,
it
yeah.
completely changes
Or
the
we
dynamic.
found that there were a lot of initiating desire, let's say men, but they wouldn't,
Stereotypically
they wouldn't actually make the first move because they, the cultural moment we live in, it's kind of like, don't pressure, don't, you're coercing, you're doing this. So they hold themselves back and they're not initiating.
Because they're kind of waiting for her to initiate.
And they
so
want
they
her
know,
to initiate, and then it's not happening.
because she's receptive desire, and so then there's disappointment.
All of those things. And we just get wrapped around the axle on this stuff, and we don't need to. There's simpler solutions.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
So
Well,
that's just one example. Yeah.
That's good to know there's simpler solutions because, yeah, you're 100% right. It's like, I want to be pursued as well.
Yeah.
And so when you're able to communicate well.
Well, and part of the issue, and this is something that I think a lot of initiating desire type people, men or women, I think there is a acceptance process that has to happen. Because this is
Agreed.
This is one thing I know for you being more of that initiating desire person.
And so, if our kids listen to this podcast, they're going to be scarred that their folks are describing their own relationship in this area.
But in all candor, for anybody who is more that initiating person married to a receptive desire person, I think that there is but I wish it wasn't that way. I want to feel pursued. I want to feel that, you find me wildly attractive. And yeah, the receptive desire person, 100%, for those of us who are that, we should be keeping in mind that this is something that makes our spouse feel really special. Like, this is an important part of our intimate life is, wow, I want to be able to honor my spouse. But there's also a reality check. There's also the initiating desire person being willing and able to say, they just have a different physiology from me, and I'm going to be disappointed for the rest of my life if I wish that their physiology was different.
Look, and the crazy thing is, we know this. If Shanti and I go to the gym together, I don't expect her to get on the bench press and bench press the same amount that I am. Her physiology is just different.
Great way to put that.
And here, it's just different. So work with what you got instead of wishing and being disappointed
yes.
and all of that.
Yeah, and having
good.
the expectations that then you just put pressure on one another. Yeah.
Yeah, which is so easy to do.
Yeah.
So I know we probably have some listeners who are dating or engaged.
Yeah.
And so how can your research help those couples with where they're at?
Well, actually, this is so crucial, right? We all know that people's intimate life, alike their life around money, right? Like, those are the two big issues. Sex and money are two of the big issues in marriage. And when you go into marriage, you are not necessarily expecting to have the kind of clashes that sometimes come. And so it is really helpful in advance to be able to go, okay, let me think through. And if you think about your intimate life, think about it like your money life. Like, you would never go into marriage with zero conversation about money. Like, how many student loans do you have? And, you know, who's the spender and who's the saver, and what matters to you? And, you know, how do we combine our bank accounts so that we're not like hiding things from each other? Like, those kinds of conversations are so crucial, and they're relatively simple. That doesn't mean they're always easy, but they need to be had. Those conversations need to be had. And I think most couples who are going through kind of a premarital kind of phase in their life, like, they would expect to need to have those conversations. It's exactly the same way in our intimate life, to be able to say, well, what's your vision? You know, what is your vision for what this is going to look like? And the part of the reason why that's so crucial, I hate to say this, but it is true. For most premarital couples, even in the church, they've already had sex, right? Like, just statistically, even if we try to say, it's so crucial that you wait till marriage and you don't come in with these weird expectations, but we do know that just happens, right? And so it's even more crucial that you actually have these conversations, because your expectations, if you have had that relationship already, your expectations are built around what that looks like before marriage. And one of the things, for example, that we know statistically when we look at all of the data from the research, is that when people are very new in their marriage, either after their marriage or if they're engaging before their marriage, most younger people who are newlyweds are more likely to be that initiating desire, both the husband and the wife. And because it's just happening a lot, and there's more spark, and there's no kids, and people, they don't have a mortgage yet, and they haven't gotten weighed down by craziness of life, and unfortunately they expect it to just go on and be that way. Yeah. And to know ahead of time, well, actually, you know what? The physiology changes. When kids come along, there's something that happens clinically often, and some of these different expectations start to happen, and suddenly you've been on the same page and you're like this. And to know that ahead of time, so we can go, okay, what are we going to do when this starts to happen? What is that going to look like? What's our vision for what we want it to stay like? So anyway.
Exactly. Putting together a plan.
Putting together a plan, and especially it's important, I'm going to sound sexist here, but actually it's kind of especially important for the woman, because most women who have receptive desire, which I think is 73% of women have receptive desire, most women have never really thought, what do I want? Because if you're the one with receptive desire, it's usually more you're being initiated to, and it's responding to what he wants. It's like, well, what do I want? Like, what's my interest in this? Like, how often do I want to be able to connect? And then suddenly, and what does that look like? And habits and things that we do together, and what am I interested in? Actually, that's a pretty important question for the wife to ask herself. That's another thing in premarital counseling that's important too.
Yeah, very good, very good. Well, let's take it back to the married couples.
Okay. Yep.
And let's talk about what are some more practical things that couples can do that you guys gain from your research.
The application of this.
Yes.
Well, you mentioned it earlier on, actually, and that's to learn to talk about it. I mean,
it's good.
It doesn't necessarily come natural, because, I would hear counselors all the time, in things that we would work through, they'd say, well, if you can just talk about it. And it's like,
just communicate.
And I'm like, how? One is, that's assuming two things. One is, I can kind of know enough that I can ask you my spouse the right question, or to try to gain some understanding, or two, that I understand what's going on inside of me enough that I can actually articulate it. All I know is I'm stirred up and frustrated. This is just me. And statistically, that tends to be a lot of guys. But I know that I'm not feeling right in whatever this area is.
I'm disappointed, or I'm
whatever it is.
frustrated, or
But
I don't
can't
know.
find the exact reason or words to use that then help us talk it through. Instead, I'm kind of like, I don't know what I'm feeling.
Other
and it's
than,
frustrating.
Other than anger or frustration,
And it's
or
frustrating.
sadness. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is. I'm sad.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't help. Why are you sad? I don't know.
Yeah. And so one of the things you mentioned early on, one of the reasons that we wrote the book the way that we did, and Dr. Michael Seitzma, who our co-author, is this very experienced sex therapist, and he's like, if we can get couples to talk about it, that right there solves so many issues. And people think and the reason people are hesitant to talk about this topic is that because it's uncomfortable, you think you're going to be talking about like techniques and body parts. And so people are like, I don't want to go there. Like,
And neither did we.
And neither did
we. We did not want to talk about that in the book.
And so we didn't really talk about that in the book, right? Like, this is not a sex manual. This is literally about what people are needing to talk about, which isn't the techniques and body parts. It's about, what are our expectations? What's running under the surface? What are some of those worries and fears and insecurities? What are the emotions where you say, I'm sad? Why are you sad? I don't know. And then we're able to give some language to that so that when you read the book together, because that was what Dr. Seitzma was like, we need to get people to be able to talk about it by reading the book out loud to each other, so that, for example, a husband who says, I'm sad, why? I'm lonely. Like, oh. Like, or whatever.
Or I don't think you want me.
Or
the way I want you.
Or a wife who's feeling, this sense of pressure, like for her to say, to be able to articulate, here's a quote of someone who said, I feel like you got back from Las Vegas and you haven't been with me in a week, you were on a business trip, and I feel like you just want to jump into bed because you've been sexually stimulated all week by seeing these, billboards and showgirls, and that doesn't feel so good that you're kind of wanting to hop. No, that's not at all. It's, I miss you, and, we haven't been together, and I don't feel close to you, and I want to feel close. It's like, oh, like it gives you language to be able to talk about it. So in sort of wrapping up the answer to that question, truly, it is about learning that you can talk about this stuff. And once you do, oh my gosh, just so much more intimacy is built.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, I definitely agree. Even my own experience with my wife, just when we learned to talk about sex and what that brought so much freedom and that open communication, it really took our marriage to another level.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah. And so I love this whole thing about communication around this topic.
Well, it's interesting having worked with Dr. Mike on this and having now been kind of tangentially on the edge of his world of sex therapists, etc., and listening to them and him training other therapists. And okay, how do you help people? One of the things that a lot of general therapists, general marriage counselors who aren't trained in this area, they get hesitant about like,
I don't want to wade in.
I don't want to wade into this because I don't know, And one of the things that we, Dr. Mike and us now are telling them is if you can help couples talk about it, that solves a huge percentage of problems. And I'll give you an example. And Dr. Mike, he shared an example we ended up putting in the book of a couple who came into his office because they were dealing with something in their intimate life.
And they were in distress.
And they were in significant distress around this topic. And so they worked with him for 4 or 5 sessions just to, be able to communicate about it, whatever. Mike never found out what the issue was. It had nothing to do with the issue.
And
they
they
just
went,
they referred to it as the issue. They literally just wanted to be able to talk about it together.
and what they said was on like the 4th or 5th session was like, we've kind of had a breakthrough and we've
Okay,
been
we're
able
good.
to talk about it, so we're good.
We're good.
And he goes, well, that's great. And he never learned.
And he never learned what the issue was.
That is so interesting.
So debunk the idea that communication is going to be too big of a deal, too high of a hill to climb, or that you have some technical issue that, is going to be different than everybody else. Most of the time, that will happen sometimes, but most of the time, just learning to be able to talk about it matters.
That's really cool. So as couples their eyes begin to open up to some of these things, and they begin to apply this in their own marriage, what are some of the potential outcomes that can come from this?
Go ahead, start.
Well, for us, one of the things that we have seen, and really in our own marriage, candidly, not just in all the research, which is true as well, is this issue is such an opportunity for conflict. And once you know these things and your eyes are opened and you learn your spouse, and it's like, wow, you feel this way? Like, I didn't realize that. Once you start having that communication around it, suddenly, instead of this issue being this opportunity for heartache and conflict, it's this opportunity for connection. It's this amazing shift.
Well, and the other thing, and I'll tell the kids, turn off the podcast to our kids right now, because this is an insight into mom and dad. But frankly, because as I was initiating desire and Shanti was more receptive desire, there was a part of me over the years that was always kind of saddened that she didn't appear to want me the same way I wanted her.
Yeah.
And, the fact of the matter was that wanting was, if she showed a little bit of skin, my engine was going. And it was like I wanted her to have that same thing. And it didn't. And what ended up through this research, through understanding her, I realized that because she's physiologically different from me, in those cases where she was choosing me, she was choosing me because she loved me, not because some biological urge overtook her and she couldn't help herself. Now, granted, I would like that too, but by being able to reframe it as she's choosing me and she is pursuing me because she loves me and wants relationship with me, that took it into a whole different realm for how I appreciated her and how she was wired and built.
And so you can see that being an example of suddenly there's more intimacy, right? Like there's more connection. And it's not because you've solved big, huge problems. Like some people will have, bigger issues. All this stuff doesn't solve those things. You could have ED or pornography or sexual pain, or like you could have those big issues. This won't solve them, but you can see how it would make it easier to solve because suddenly you're connected.
Yeah. You're on the same page.
Yeah.
Communicating.
Yeah.
That's so good. Thank you guys again for sharing with us. This has been an excellent time. And
Oh,
your book,
thanks.
I absolutely love this book. Jeff and Shanti, thank you guys for being here on our show today.
Pleasure.
It's truly a pleasure.
Absolutely. You guys just share a little bit about how people can get to know your resources and what you guys provide?
Yeah, absolutely. For this topic, honestly, the easiest thing is for people to go to secretsofsexandmarriage.com, same as the book title. And we have spent a lot of time actually getting a bunch of resources up there for people who want to go further.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for doing all this work and everything you guys have put together. And congratulations on your new book and things. I know there's a lot of work that went into that.
Thanks for having us, Matt.
Yeah,
Really.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Hey, we had a great conversation, and we want to thank you all for joining us for this podcast. And we look forward to seeing you again in our next one.